Oh, I'm gonna admit Bernadette Mayer.
Great. Okay.
Oh, okay. I have to keep hitting okay.
Do we have to keep hitting okay?
No,
No.
Oh,
it showed that it was being recorded and I hadn't put in the okay part.
Ah, ah,
I'm slow.
Okay. So, um, hello everyone. Welcome to this event featuring a discussion around the book Women in Independent Publishing: A History of Unsung Innovators, 1953 to 1989, edited by Stephanie Anderson and published in 2024 by the University of New Mexico Press. My name is Nick Sturm, and I'm co-director with Rosa Campbell of the Network for New York School Studies, an international organization of writers, artists, and scholars with wide-ranging interests in 20th and 21st century poetry, poetics, and interdisciplinary aesthetic practices, including the traditions of small press publishing that will be the focus of tonight's event. Established in 2018, the Network for New York School Studies hosts regular free online events like this one, along with in-person symposia, including past gatherings in London, New York City, and Paris. We are aiming to host another in-person symposium in Scotland in summer 2026. Details on that event should be available soon. Another quick note, the network's next online event will be in February 2026, where we'll be celebrating the release of Joe Brainerd's The Complete Sea Comics, edited by Ron Padgett and just published by NYRB. More information on that event will also be available soon. I'm really excited that we're able to host this incredible intergenerational panel of poet, editor, publishers tonight, including Stephanie Anderson, editor of Women in Independent Publishing, and MC Hyland, who contributed an afterword to the book, along with Patricia Spears Jones and Maureen Owen, both of whom were interviewed by Stephanie for the book. The interviews with women and non-binary editors and publishers that Stephanie has compiled here is a resource that will continue to be a much cited and critical foundation for years to come. My own scholarship is deeply indebted to Stephanie's work, and it's been a joy to have this book as a single volume after years of eagerly reading and rereading so many of these interviews in other publications and forums. It's a staggeringly useful, entertaining, and provocative book, and only Stephanie, with her deep attention to material practices, the gendered conditions of artistic labor, avant-garde aesthetics, and the wildest strains of American literary production, could have produced such a collection of interviews. The more I do work in our field, I continue to find out how unlikely it is that a researcher makes the choice to reach out directly to the living subjects of their work. It's just not
Mm.
something one gets trained to do in literary studies. For Stephanie, though, it seems no big deal. Why not call up Hetty Jones or Alice Notley to talk about little magazines? Stephanie's ability to imagine this project and to complete it with purpose, equity, and such encyclopedic familiarity with the relation between poetry and independent publishing practices is remarkable. Future researchers in publishing studies, print culture studies, and literary histories of American poetry will find this book an indispensable resource. So, with that, let's get started. I'll introduce MC, and then she will be leading the rest of the event. Throughout tonight's discussion, please feel free to post questions in the chat that participants will be able to answer during the Q&A following this discussion. We're aiming for about a 75-minute event in total, give or take a few minutes. Throughout the discussion, you'll find links to recent books by each of our guests popping up in the chat, so please check out their work. Okay. MC Hyland is founding editor of Double Cross Press, a poetry micropress. She is the author of over a dozen poetry chapbooks, artist books, and two previous full-length books of poems, The End, published by Sidebrow in 2019, and Never Again Land, published by Lowbrow Press in 2010, as well as a book of short essays, The Dead and the Living and the Bridge, published by Meekling Press in 2025. Holding MFAs in both book arts and creative writing from the University of Alabama and a PhD in English literature from NYU, MC is a teacher, scholar, artist, and arts administrator and lives in St. Paul, Minnesota. Their newest book is Walks and Weathers, published last month by Itasca Books. MC is one of the most brilliant contemporary poet publishers and someone whose work and models of small press community making I deeply admire. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, MC.
Great. Thank you, Nick. I'm going to pull up some slides, so just give me a brief technical moment here. I couldn't resist. I like having things to look at. So, my screen sharing is paused. Does
Hmm.
that give me 1 second. I'm gonna stop sharing and try again. You know what? Actually, I wonder if I put this into slideshow mode, and I wonder if that's now a problem. I'm gonna try this one more time. Are you seeing anything?
Just a little note.
Just a little note. That's not good. All right. 1 second. This worked great when we were doing our tech run through, but now it's being weird. Okay, wait. I'm gonna just try this one more time. Uh, okay. I think this is it. I think the problem was that I put it into slideshow. Yes. Okay. We can now see some slide. If I go into slideshow, can you see a screen of things? Yay!
Yay.
You might have to move our faces around a little bit because I wasn't thinking about how we need space for zooming. But I'm here. I'm just so happy to be part of this conversation. As Nick said, here, wait, I'm going to see if I can put all of my notes on my computer without blocking my camera. Yes. As Nick said, I am a poet and publisher, and I have been, I think Stephanie described me in the after or in her notes for this book as a cheerleader, a longtime cheerleader of this project, this collection of interviews. And I'm really, for many years, every time Stephanie and I talked, which was very frequently, I would say, so what's going on with the interviews book? So it feels really wonderful to be here celebrating that it's this incredible object that is out in the world, circulating and informing people. And I was lucky enough to get to write the afterword, which allowed me to really spend a lot of time with this book. And I so value its contribution to the record of independent publishing. So today I am going to introduce our illustrious panelists, who are all well known as writers, writers and educators in particular, maybe also scholars. But in my introduction, I want to focus on their careers as editors and publishers. I want to very briefly offer a tour of the editorial work that they discuss in the book. And then I'm also just going to mention briefly some of their subsequent editing and publishing work. I'm going to start with our two interviewees, Maureen Owen and Patricia Spears Jones. The book of interviews is chronologically arranged, so I decided that was also how I was going to introduce people. So we're going to begin with Maureen's editorial work on telephone and telephone books, which started in 1969, and then we'll talk about Patricia's work a little bit later. So next slide. Are you seeing a new slide?
Yes.
Beautiful. All right. So Maureen Owen is the author of 13 books of poetry. Most recently, Everything Turns on a Delicate Measure from Blaze Vox Books. She is a former program director at the Poetry Project at St. Mark's Church, relevant to New York School Studies. And she's a longtime faculty member at Naropa University. But what's important for our purposes today is that she's also the editor and publisher of Telephone Journal and Telephone Books. These are a few early issues of Telephone, which ultimately produced 19 issues over its 14-year run, based on what the Granary Books Telephone collection has told me. Those were in editions of about 750 copies. So these are early issues from the time period in which I believe the majority of the printing was being done on the Gestetner mimeograph at the Poetry Project. Around the same time that the journal began, Maureen also started Telephone Books. which lasted from 1969 to 2003. Had a whole range of production practices, a whole range of books, ranging from stapled Mimeo to, is this Offset, the 2022, or is that right? That should be 2002. I wildly updated that book. The
Oh,
Susan Campbell
the
should
Mother
not be
Journal.
2022. Yeah, the Mother Journal should be 2002, right? I think I messed that up in my slide.
Yeah, it should. Right, sorry. Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
there were two, the Mother Journal and then another book of Susan's titled Dredged.
Yeah, yeah,
And those were 2002 and 2003.
yeah. And the books for telephone books were produced in runs of most often 300 to 350, 500. Occasionally, there were some print runs as high as 1,000 copies. Maureen also has some later editorial projects which didn't make it into the conversations in women in independent publishing, but just to sort of have them on our map. First, there's Board, which she co-edits. Is that, how do I do on pronunciation, Maureen?
That's pretty good. I usually say it wrong. It's like
Um,
Hunabor without the D.
Board, yeah.
Hunabor.
Scandinavian pronunciation is always a challenge.
Yeah,
But this is described as a retrozine often. She co-publishes it with Eleanor Nowen. She also was the editor-in-chief for many years of the Naropa University online journal, Not Enough Night.
right.
Um,
And I
so
had
that's
a co-editor too,
oh,
Junior Burke, who also taught in Naropa.
okay. Terrific. Yeah. All right. And then I'm going to move on to Patricia's editorial contributions. So Patricia Spears Jones is the author of 5 books of poems, most recently The Beloved Community from Copper Canyon Press, as well as at least 5 chapbooks. She was the first African American programmer at the Poetry Project at St. Mark's Church, where she served as program coordinator. She's a longtime arts and literary organizer, culture worker, and educator. But what we're going to talk about today is her publishing work from the 1970s and 1980s. Which begins with this Mimeo magazine, WB, which published one journal in 1970, or one issue in 1975. She was also involved in the editorial collectives for the 1978 Ordinary Women anthology of writing by diverse women poets in New York City, and the Heresies Collective, where she was part of the editorial team for the 17th issue dedicated to women's performance writing. That's a copy, an image of the cover for that issue. More recent editorial work of Patricia's includes the 2015 issue of About Place Journal, The Future Imagined Differently, and in 2009, this PDF chapbook, which you can in fact download and print and fold into your own chapbook. Think Poems for Aretha Franklin's Inauguration Day hat. And finally, Stephanie Anderson, the editor of this collection, intrepid interviewer and researcher, is author of several poetry books and chapbooks, most recently Bearings from New Michigan Press, as well as the co-editor of All This Thinking, the correspondence of Bernadette Mayer and Clark Coolidge. Oh, and I have a slide for Stephanie as well. She teaches at Duke Kunshan University and also co-ran the chapbook press Projective Industries from 2008 to sometime approaching 2018. And what I'm going to do today, I have a set of questions to get us started. I have kind of 4 questions that I think probably we could all talk about for a very long time. I'm going to stop sharing. And then after I'm done asking my questions, I'm hoping and suspecting that there may be questions either from other panel members or from the audience. So do feel free to use the chat to include questions as we go on. But I want to start by kind of thinking about the social world because we are at the Network for New York School Studies. So I want to ask a first question that's kind of drawing on these interviews. Patricia, you mentioned in your interview that Maureen was one of the people who encouraged you to start a journal before you put out WB in 1975. And I was wondering if both of you could tell us a little bit about when and how and where your paths crossed in New York. Obviously, the Poetry Project is a kind of central location that you both circulated through. But I'm wondering like where and how at the Poetry Project you would see each other. So would you run into each other at readings? Would you be at collation?
Yeah, it was just
Yeah,
readings and workshops. That was basically it.
yeah.
Yeah. And we would
Yeah.
probably run into each other at other readings too. there were lots of readings around town.
Huh.
Yeah.
Do you remember any particular, like, Patricia, you say readings and workshops? I mean, I know this is a while ago, so.
Well, it is a while ago, and basically in the early days, the only workshop I really took was with Lois Warsh. I
Mhm.
later took a workshop with Maureen, but that was much after I'd done the publication. Uh, but people were always sort of hands on deck at the Poetry Project. If somebody had a magazine that they needed to get collated, or if something else was happening, everybody was there. And Maureen was just kind of one of the more welcoming people who are in the sort of, the upper echelon, I guess, or something like that. She had wild hair and everybody was like, oh my God. But she was also really friendly and very kind. And also she published one of my first poems. So that was part of it. Because everybody did the open mics on Monday. Monday was open mic night at the Poetry Project. And so I think she heard one of the poems, the Patti Smith poem that I wrote.
All
Um,
right.
and so she said, I can publish that. And, I said, okay. I was like,
Yeah.
somebody,
That's
yeah,
probably how we met,
yeah,
officially, because that's
yeah,
what I would do. I would go to readings, and then when I heard a poem I liked, I would just accost the person and say, "Can I publish that poem?"
Costas, you were very nice, you know. And everybody was like, sure,
That's
you
how
can publish me.
yeah, that was how I got almost all the work for telephone, was like just going up to people and asking. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And also, once you saw the journal was so beautiful. I mean, it
Oh,
was just physically striking. And that was one of the things that everybody noticed immediately. So, yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
and I would,
'cause I loved making telephone. Just every copy seemed like a different painting or something, because I
Mhm.
could use rubber stamps, I could do all different things, and different kind of covers and pages. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
and you were also collaborating with a lot of different people, with some of the visual elements of at least the books, right? If not the journal, Maureen.
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, with the books, I almost always let people do as much of the book as they wanted to, like the
Mhm.
covers, people could pick whatever they wanted to for cover. And I try to stay back out of the picture, so it's really them, you know.
Yeah, because when she published uh, my 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 book, the chapbook mythologizing always,
Always, yeah.
I asked, Richard. Now he's known as Richard J. Powell. He was known as Rick Powell at that time. Well, because he's a professor of
Yeah.
African
Professor
art
Paul.
history at Duke University, but for the cover, and it's really quite striking. It's quite beautiful.
It is beautiful. Yeah, I
And
love
and
that
it's
book.
and it started me on my whole idea of only having uh, actual living African American artists do the cover art for any
Yeah.
poetry publication that I have.
And we have that rubber stamp, your fan
Mm-hmm.
stamp.
Because
Patricia
I
has
was,
a
I,
beautiful rubber stamp. Yeah.
yeah,
I think Stephanie is maybe looking to find the rubber stamp to show us.
Can you find it?
it's inside. I think,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
inside. It's in
There we
front.
are. Oh,
Very
beautiful.
cool. Isn't that
yeah.
beautiful?
Hmm.
Very nice.
That's so wonderful. What year was that?
Ah,
I should have put that in my notes.
19, I think it was 1979. I think 79,
that
1980.
sounds about right.
Yeah,
81.
Oh,
81. Okay,
81.
close. Yeah.
yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, and was that, it looks like it's potentially
No,
photocopied Mio?
No,
No? Or
no. Patricia's was mimeographed, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Beautiful. Yeah, this actually kind of leads me into my next question, which I apologize. I'm a real like material culture nerd because I'm a letterpress printer. And so I'm always really
Oh,
curious about process,
great.
kinds of things that process does
Yeah.
to how we read and how we experience a text. So in your interview, Maureen, you talked a bit about the pros and cons of Mimeo versus like working with a professional printer on a book with a spine. And you've both worked as editors, as writers, etc., in both modes, right? So telephone and telephone books has some Mimeo and Staples books and some offset printed ones. And Patricia WB was Mimeo, while you had later on offset printed and even digital
Mhm.
projects. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about how you kind of think about the differences between the kind of formats of publishing, and do they feel different to you as editors? Do they feel different to you as writers? Do you like respond differently to seeing your writing in, an offset printed perfect bound book than a Mimeo? And obviously this is sort of a long-standing conversation, but I'd love to just hear a little bit of your thoughts about it.
Sure. Well, I think in terms of the magazine, especially, um, to do Mimeo was really important because it's so immediate. You can put your Mimeo magazine together so fast and make changes and switch page. You have such total control. And so I could ask someone, say at a reading, they read a poem that I liked, and they might say, "Well, I'm not sure it's finished yet. I'm working on it," and that was okay. We could run it that way because with Mimeo, it's not set in stone. It's more like a moving words, and so I always felt with the magazine, if people could always change their work, and then it could be in a book. But
Mm,
I think it has that moving possibility more. Once it's bound in a book, you feel more like you can't change it.
that's true.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Although the Mimeo books were certainly books in every way.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I didn't really think that much about it. I mean, when we did an anthology, there was no way you're going to do it unless it was offset print. There's
Yeah.
too many different kinds of poems were submitted, and it would have taken forever. I mean, all 3,000 copies are gone. There's no
Wow.
more Ordinary Women. It is now officially a rare book.
Yeah.
And so so it was so that was really interesting. And when I was working for Heresies, I mean the process in Heresies was more of the back end than the actual physical process, because it was more like all those collectives meeting and deciding on the theme, who's going to be in it, who's going
Mm.
to take responsibility for what. You know, as I said to somebody when I was working for the Heresies Collective that, which is all women's collective, is that I would go home and watch the A Team. I needed a, I needed a male kind of like, please give me another side, because the guy would say, "Here's the plan," and it was done. You're like, yes, so, and after 2 or 3 months of people going, but often some of the most interesting journals came out of that process, and some it was very enlightened. That there is a heresies issue, which I wasn't on the editorial thing of, but I did volunteer work around it, was the women and racism issue. And it was very early on that everybody realized that white women had absolutely no idea what they're talking about, because they had no idea that they could be racist, seeing as how they were feminist and they were working in this collective and they were trying to do this, all this anti everything, but they weren't, they couldn't quite get they couldn't understand in really deep and clear deep ways what racial oppression and did to women of color. It just didn't. They tried, but it was like an extremely difficult issue to publish.
Mm.
It was extremely difficult, but the women in architecture issue, that wasn't
Mm.
right,
Yeah.
because the women in architecture, you know, and were really upset because they were treated like, shit, basically, by the men in the profession. And they had really interesting ideas. And that was like, the late, mid 80s. And there was just the beginning of serious historical work and the ways in which women's ideas were either dismissed or they would come back decades later, like, all those open kitchen plan things. That was all female centered. That all came out of the early 20th century. It was ignored
Yeah.
until, ta-da.
Duh.
So it's like until it can make money, right? And
Mhm.
so it was very interesting. ACT UP was fascinating because I was working along with other people in performance art, along with everything else, and we we also went international on that. We were the first people in the United States to publish something by Pina Bausch,
Mm.
right? And stuff, and it was a fairly genial collective. I mean, we really worked hard, but I'm very proud of that issue. We did really some good work. Digital was a lot of fun. So this is what happened. So, Obama wins. Aretha Franklin sings at the inauguration and wears this incredible
Crazy
hat,
hat.
which, by the way, was designed by a man named Luke Song, who is a Korean American and who has his factory in Detroit, where Ms. Franklin lived. And and then all of a sudden I started seeing these really snarky, stupid, going back to the racism thing here, and
Mm.
misogyny, comments about her hat.
Oh,
And I was like, I was enraged. I mean, I really was. I said, the level of disrespect, and I had to say this, a lot of it came from gay men, which was startling to me. They should have known better.
yeah.
You know,
They should be a little more fashion conscious.
really, I'm like, what
Yeah.
with you people? Anyway, and I was like, and I went off and I emailed some friends and said, you know, why don't we just write some poems like, about Aretha's hat? And that's how that happened.
Ah,
And it was because I was on Facebook. And that was one of the first times, and because I pulled it, I mean, literally, I sent a note out to people within, like, I don't know, 72 hours. All kinds of folks sent poems back. At a certain point, I just sort of stopped
yeah.
taking anything, and I I pulled them all together. It was my editing. And I had one poet I had to really edit because she went on forever. Anyway, um, uh, and I talked to Betsy Sussler about it, and she thought it was a great idea. And so we did. We pulled it off, and then we sent copies to both Obama and Ms. Franklin, and we never heard from either one.
Doggone, that was a great idea, though.
Yeah,
Oh,
but we never heard from President
They
Obama.
probably didn't get it,
President
the
Obama and
secretary.
Michelle Obama owe me uh, a,
Yeah,
a response of some sort.
I
You know,
think so.
it could be problematic because we did send it via Bomb magazine, and they may have thought it was something
Oh,
else.
that's true.
yeah. Unfortunate name of magazine, maybe.
I know, I know. Every once in a while, I say to Betsy, "Really? Don't you think?" But it's too late now, so there you go. But the digital thing was okay. I'm going to stop because I'm baking bread at the same time, and I have to check my bread in a minute. But I'll finish by saying that one of the things that I thought was really interesting about doing this thing digitally was that something could be done spontaneously, that you could within, and you see it now, with say the publication of Palestinian poets or Ukrainian poets,
Yeah.
getting their stuff out really fast from, the battlefields or wherever the fuck they
Right.
are. And so that I think is extremely important.
Yeah.
And
It's
and
faster than Mimeo even.
yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Yeah, kind of a return to immediacy and then like plus
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Really immediate. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah. Um, Patricia, why don't you check your bread and I'll talk a little bit. I'll ask the next question. So in both of your interviews, and I'm kind of thinking now about the ways that like Facebook is another sort of infrastructure. Like I think there's kind of geographic infrastructure in New York that gets discussed in these issues, as well as kind of access to Vimeo, access to potentially funding for offset printing, et cetera. But I was really trying to think about how to make our questions New York responsive to the audience that we have with the Network for
Mhm.
New York School Studies. And I know both of you talk quite a bit about the geographies and the social networks of New York City. So Maureen, you specifically kind of talk about the Lower East Side scene and this sort of question of who was and wasn't comfortable putting themselves forward in the poetry projects publications, like who wasn't submitting, but also maybe
Mhm.
some people felt invited and some people didn't. And Patricia, who I'm hoping can still hear me from off screen. But Patricia, in your interview, you discussed kind of both the downtown scene and then also groups like the group of Black women writers who met on the Upper West Side, spearheaded by June Jordan. So I'm curious about how you think about New York's place in your editing career, how you think about your editing work's relationship to New York. And maybe also just how you think of your relationship to the label of New York School writing, and that could be as a writer or an editor. And I know you're both non-native New Yorkers. And I know Patricia kind of suggested that being a non-native New Yorker, kind of beaming in from somewhere else, gave you a sort of freedom of movement that you might not have had if that was the world that you came up in. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a very sort of open-ended question, but I'd love for you to just kind of think a little bit or think with us a little bit about the city, as one of you is still working in New York, one is that's no longer that hasn't been your primary location for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, just how do you feel about the New York school in relation to you?
Yeah. Well, for me, although I'm not from New York, I feel like I was born again there. So I'm still very much in touch with everybody there in New York, and my co-editor for Hula is in New York. Um, so I think New York was just such a revelation to me because I'd come from the West Coast, and I'd been living in Japan, and then way out in the hills in Missouri for a year doing a hippie thing. And so I'd never been where there was such a tremendous gathering of artists, writers, poets, dancers, creative people in a very small radius, really, even counting not only the Lower East Side, but uptown as well, where there were lots of readings going on. So it, in that way, I think New York was very inclusive. Like there were lots of get-togethers and different people from different disciplines. Um, went to readings, or poets went to the their dance concerts. So I think there was such a tight feeling among all the artists and creative people that it sort of created this energy in a small pocket in this kind of wonderful way. And as far as people feel, people had come from all over. And if you didn't know anybody and you just arrived in New York, even on the Lower East Side, there were a lot of other people there who weren't poets so it's always hard to find that niche, how you get in touch with people who are like you, like-minded and stuff like that. And I think people went to readings and things, but they were a little shy about, you know, saying or saying, "Can you publish my poem?" or something like that. And there were little magazines, but there weren't that many. And even though it was inexpensive to produce one, you had to have like a Gestetner machine, or you had to have something, some money. Although it was very inexpensive to live there then, which was great. Um, but yeah, I think it. I think the thing telephone just kind of fell into this wonderful place where people were just ripe for, and I was kind of a shy person all my life, but something happened to me when I came to New York. I could go right up to people after a reading and ask this person they never, didn't know at all, who was I, and what kind of little magazine was I been talking about, and ask them for a poem, and they would give me a poem. So I think it was just a ripe time for a lot of things to come together and for people to publish if
Hmm.
they stepped up to do it.
I don't know. I wasn't quite here for the question. So,
How's the bread?
Yeah, I was really just kind of asking about because the landscape of New York is something that shows up in both of your interviews. And I know for you, Patricia, you both kind of say like because I was an outsider, I was able to talk to everybody, like that you had a little bit of a superpower kind of coming in fresh to the city. But you also kind of traced out a geography of different writers communities that you were connected with. So the question was really just sort of about this idea of the New York School and thinking about both the term New York School, but also kind of how you think about New York in connection with your editing, with your poetry and poetics. Yeah, just kind
oh,
of
I thought I
the
see. Yeah.
space of the city. Yeah.
I never even thought about the New York School until people started saying, "You're part of the New York School." And I said, "How?" And also, frankly, um, because I was an outsider, but I was an outsider in a lot of different ways. And Maureen knows this. There was like me and Charlotte Carter and
Yeah.
Yuki and about three other people of color, literally, who hung out regularly at the Poetry Project. And
Well,
so,
Lorenzo was one, yeah.
yeah, but
Lorenzo.
he left New York in about 1975 or 76. So so in some ways, I felt like I can say I felt like I really got into becoming a New Yorker, but I came through from the theater side because when I moved to New York, I was working with the people in Malibu Mines, hanging out with all the people who were were part of Meredith the Monk or Andre Gregory's group or somebody all these going to the Bert Hoffman School of Birds and watching the dancers twirling and twirling and twirling and twirling and twirling. And so, and twirling. Thank you, Robert Wilson. You know, so, so I did a lot of going to new music concerts, theater things, dance. And then I found some of my people more. I'm going to take the bread out now. Um, Stop. I found my people, or some of my people, at the New Eurekan Poets Cafe. Also, the Fei Chang had a very multicultural mix of people at Basement Workshop. So somehow, all of the writers of color, we kind of had our own version of all of this because we were not part of, and also, I mean, Maureen was there, thank God, and a few other women. But when I came to New York, the New York the Poetry Project was very white, very male, very straight,
Mm,
and not particularly, with a few exceptions, not particularly interested in what women writers had to say.
true.
Uh, they really weren't.
Yeah.
They just thought, we were dismissed, and then we were dismissed at the New Eurekans. I mean, it was like the
Yeah.
patriarchy roared its ugly head all over the
Yeah.
place. So one of the reasons why there were so many women-only readings, why there was women's books and Juna books, and then the early gay bookstores and stuff was literally because there was like that there was this stranglehold on literary culture in the early 70s that was very, very, very white, very male, very trying to make it. It's interesting to read like Hetty Jones's um, interview and think about her. I think she was at Partisan. Was it Partisan Review? Yeah. Um, and and all these people wanted to be in that. They wanted to work their way up and get into the big guy. They wanted to wear the big boy pants in literature, and so it's interesting to think of her as working there and then working running Eugen with Amiri Baraka, and so I mean it's like there was this kind. There's also that uptown downtown or midtown downtown
Mm,
thing too that was going on, because when what um, Maureen is talking about and what I'm kind of talking about was really a very downtown world. It
mm,
really was,
yeah.
and it was fairly mixed.
Mm,
It kind of had to be because it was like all kinds of
right.
interesting people showed up in the East and West Village, or the Lower East Side, and the West
Yeah.
and Greenwich Village until they became East and West Village. Uh, for the so, as what's her name pointed out, so they could rent apartments. Um, Ways in which naming takes place in cities is fascinating, but it was really important to be part of that mix. And New York was really exciting
Mm,
in the early to mid 70s. It really was.
yeah.
I mean, it
Well, I
wasn't
think
just
even
because
earlier.
it
Yeah.
was because all kinds of shit was happening.
Yeah.
The music was amazing. That dance was going on. Salsa was happening. CBGBs was happening. Tin
Right.
Palace and all the new music guys were happening. And then all of these poets were floating in and out from Lord knows where. And they would show up at the Poetry Project where they would read, or they
Yeah.
would read,
Yeah.
at the New Eurekan, if, or or any number of, you know, 20 or 30 readings around the city every
Yeah.
week, somewhere in a bar, in a
Right.
speakeasy, in a church,
Yeah.
in a theater.
Right.
Somebody was reading something.
You remember Bob Holman's poetry calendar? It was
Yeah,
packed.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, that same kind of energy is around, but it right now it feels much more corporate,
Mm,
very brand. People are on brand way too ever much, and
yeah.
so you know, some people are, I'm a spoken word poet. People come up to me and say, I say I'm a poet. They say, what kind of poet? And I just look at them and say, I think I'm a great poet. I don't know about you, because
Yeah.
that's ridiculous. But there are people who go, I only do blah, blah, blah. And,
Uh,
that's what they do.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like the whole city has become a market, so you need to figure out what kind of product you are.
Yeah. Well, I guess in that way, I have been outside the city, I don't
Mhm.
have that. I don't have that feeling about it. Yeah.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
do you feel like that kept certain things kind of loose for you? Like being out of the city?
Um, good question. Well, I love New York. So probably if it wasn't for my children, I would still be in New York. Um, and I love to go back, and I try to, go 2 or 3 times a year and stay in touch with people. But hmm,
I also
I
feel like maybe that was a sort of counterfactual and therefore unanswerable question.
What was
yeah, it's hard to say. I feel now like it's not the same city for sure, when I really lived there. Um, so if I went back and lived there, I probably wouldn't like it.
I agree. I think right
Yeah.
now the city is, um, in many ways, I look at young people. I mean, I can see why we have a new mayor that isn't up from the crypt.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
Um,
good.
because oh my God, it was like, wow, what?
Uh,
Anyway, um, because this place desperately needs energy and it needs to break um, the spell of super wealth. Because
yeah.
that, I mean, I was at a wedding about 20 years ago, and one of my friends, one of his groomsmen we were talking, and he was going to Columbia, and he was working on his no, I think it was his doctoral thesis or something, and he was coming up with, and he said he was going to be writing a book about why it's not about the poor that's the problem in society, but the wealthy. And I went like, really? What do you mean? I said, look, who do you think runs things? Who do you think takes up all the energy? Who do you think takes up all the resources? And it's not poor people.
No, that's
It's
true.
not. It's never
Yeah,
has been. It's
yeah,
the wealthy. And we're now seeing exactly what he was talking about. I mean, it's sort of looking at us in plain sight, and it's really ugly,
yeah,
and it's not as if, there hasn't been robber barons and all kinds of,
right.
horrible people,
But you're
but
so right, because it's like that wonderful energy that used to be there has just been sucked out or something.
or people are just really working like 9,000 jobs just to have
Well, right, just to
a,
stay there.
a just to stay put,
Yeah, yeah,
and people always had like at least two or three, but you didn't have 9,000. So I mean, it's
yeah.
just so that part of it, and also the idea that everything has to be catered to one very specific. I mean, even middle class and upper middle class people are pissed because all the kinds of ways in which you could have a generous and comfortable life in the city is much more expensive than it
Mm,
was, say, 20 years ago.
yeah,
And you can't blame it on COVID, and you can't blame it on we lost. It's just that there's too many people who are way up here, and everything is going with them, as
yeah,
opposed to sort of staying, where
right.
you might be able to, go out and have, a cappuccino.
Yeah.
Also, rich people in the 70s were more interesting.
I think you're probably right about
They
that.
really were. They were just more
Yeah.
interesting
Because
people.
now there's too many. And
Was
and
it just
the
they're
reason
boring.
for
They wear
being
boring
rich is so
and
boring.
wear
Yeah.
boring clothes, and they write boring poems and boring stories, and we had to see them, and they're influencers, and they're dumb, and it's like you just want to go like, please get off the internet, go do something else, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah,
go
I
to
know
the
what you mean.
Himalayas and find, I don't know. I mean, it's like, please get the hell out. Anyway, so I'm just that was Patricia being like, very bad about all these people coming here with money who don't do anything with it.
Mm,
That's what's really sad.
right.
Um, but there are incredible younger poets. They are making their own, um, you know, zines and publications. It's really interesting to see how they pull that off, and because it's always going to be that, there's always going to be that, and it's not just New York. New York is one specific place because, well, I live in New York. That's why. But if I was in Chicago, or if I was in Philly, or if I was in LA, or if I was in San Francisco, you know. But the one thing that Maureen said that's really true, that's very different from almost all those other people, is that the diversity and the inclusion here is different. Yes, I was hanging out at the Poetry Project, and yes, I would go over to the New Eurekan Poets Cafe. But every once in a while, somebody from the New Eurekan Poets Cafe showed up at the Poetry Project. And then by the time, Bob and Miguel started the slam thing after they, borrowed it from Chicago. Uh, because that was that kind of downtown energy was
Mm,
was kind of expanded, and
right.
it continues to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I mean it's interesting because it's much harder for like young people to come and be artists in,
Anywhere,
now, but
anywhere.
anywhere, that's true.
Yeah.
Literally anywhere. Yeah, there's so much private equity in real estate, right? In rental real estate.
Oh, yeah. The rent's ridiculous.
I
Yeah.
say tax the REITs, tax them
Mhm.
80%.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I
I'm gonna swerve us back a little bit towards
say.
writing and editing. Because I have a final question that I wanted to ask both of you, but also I thought maybe Stephanie, you might want to weigh on in this as well. And then I want to open this up and see if other people have some questions, and if not, I have more things that I'd love to talk about. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the relationship between your editing and your writing. Like how does the work you've done as an editor and you've both started out as editors who worked solo, but also worked collaboratively in later editorial projects, and maybe those have influenced you in different ways. But do you see a relationship, and what is that? Can you talk about that?
Well, I think as you know, like when I first, especially when I was doing telephone, um, because it was a great education, because
Mm,
I would get all these poems from all over the, all over the, all over the U.S. and beyond. So I could see all the work all these younger poets who weren't published. I could see so much poetry that I
mm,
wouldn't have had exposure to at all.
mm,
So being an editor in that sense really was an education. Uh, to of a feeling, I sort of had a feeling what the whole United States, what people were doing in different areas and stuff. And cartoonists, like Dave Maurice's poetry comics. And so in that sense, I'm sure being an editor influenced me a lot because it really opened me up to uh, what was going on, what people were writing that you would
mm,
never see because it was so hard to get into a magazine, you know.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think that, well, I mean, I'm glad that I did WB and sad at the same time because I could never get enough money together to do a second issue.
mm,
And every when I go back to my journals and look at, I was trying to organize a benefit to raise money for it, and I just could not pull it off. I mean, it's like, and what all it said to me very much was, and yeah, and Maureen is right. You know, it was cheap. It was very cheap. The city
yeah.
was, fairly inexpensive, but I was already poor.
Well, that's
So,
true. Yeah, you
if
were
you're a
poor.
poor person in a poor city, uh, you know, uh,
Yeah, yeah,
the ways in which you can build something becomes very, very problematic.
right. That's true.
And so it was extremely difficult, because it just felt like, I mean, I don't think I failed as an editor. I think I look back, I was looking at it going, my gosh, Lee Brewer's in this issue, and he
Mm,
went on. I mean, that was one of the first times he was ever published, and
wow.
his poems were ever published. The There's a great there were great poems by Yuki Hartman, because I was in the same workshop with Yuki and Guy Gautier and
Oh,
Bill Kushner and Robin Messing. So I put all my, buddies in the magazine,
yeah, yeah.
and stuff. But I really am incredibly proud of what we did with Ordinary Women. And because I was talking to, I have an intern, and we're talking about women in publishing, and I was telling her about I was getting ready for this panel. I was reading all this stuff. Anyway, and I was saying, it was really interesting in the 70s. There were so many women who did not want to be in all female spaces,
Mhm.
artistically. And we're very clear about that. And which I thought was odd, but I mean, I'm a more of a doer than a thinker about doing it person.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think I am too. Yeah.
like, I'm not a theorist. I wasn't, it was like, well, what were you thinking about? I'm like, we just did this, right? Like,
Yeah.
we thought, Sarah Miles and I were hanging out one day, and we just said, and I had heard that there was a anthology, which I've never physically seen, maybe some of you have,
Mm.
called Third World Women on the West Coast. And I thought, wow, and they had Chinese women and Japanese women and Black women and blah, all, et cetera. And I thought, well, why don't we do something like that for New York,
Yeah.
And so we decided to each of us take on our community. So I got all the Black women poets, and she got the white women, and we asked Faye to find Asian women, and Sandra Maria Esteves for Latinas.
Yeah.
And so so it literally is a blueprint for how to have an inclusionary
Mhm.
anthology, because all the other women anthologies would have a token Black person, a token Asian person,
Yeah.
and
A
if
very
it,
narrow
yeah,
editorship.
yeah,
Yeah.
incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
and so it was like really annoying. And so, to put it mildly, and so we just said we can do better than that. And
Yeah.
Adria and Rich agreed with us, and she wrote the intro, and she lent us money to pay for the printing.
That's really
You know,
great.
so you know, and
Yeah.
some of those poems hold up after
Absolutely.
40 years or something.
Yeah. And
Uh,
especially historically,
yeah.
it's a time and place.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, and Lois Elaine Griffith did the cover. We had, like, calligraphic sort of, she can, talk to somebody, Chinese, with like the calligraphy on the
Oh,
front.
right.
These
Yeah.
common women. Um, I mean, and we wanted to say that we were talking about, and we wanted to really say, we wanted to be anti-elitist in the sense of, we wanted it to say, this is about young women, and because all of the poets were young women. I think Janice Sternberg may have been in her 30s at that time, and this is where we were at. This is what was going on. These are what we were
Yeah.
thinking about. These are our ideas, and it has incredible energy and extraordinary truth about how complicated and sometimes how delightful being a young woman can be. Who the heck is
Right.
calling? Oh, that's all right. It's a Cesaride.
Well,
I'll just ignore
well,
it.
that's such an important point you made too there. I think that you just you just do something. You don't think about how difficult it is or how would you possibly be able to do. You just jump in and do it.
Yeah,
And that's the way you could get something done.
yeah,
I mean, I was thinking, Patricia, when you're like, I don't think of WB as a failure. I was like, no, because if you hadn't just jumped in and done it, there would be no issues. And having
right.
one
Yeah.
issue is such a success, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Stephanie, could I ask you to chime in a little bit?
Oh, it's so hard to go after all of this eloquence. I mean, I think many of the same kind of energies and considerations apply. That when Patricia, when you were mentioning, well, when you were both mentioning kind of just doing it and just wanting to do something, I was thinking about Kristen's here, and we co-edited the Mayor Coolidge letters, and I mean that came out of a very similar conversation, like just we were sitting together one night and said kind of like, oh, why don't we just do this? Someone should just publish these. These are amazing, you know.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so there was that kind of energy, I think, throughout different sort of editorial projects for me. For Projective Industries, it was very much also about starting in a moment that I was leaving New York and
Mm.
leaving a kind of, to steal Patricia's phrase, a beloved community, and wanting to kind of think about how to be in touch. And so it was largely about some of the community stuff that's been mentioned. But I think through the years in which I was doing Projective Industries, there was also I was in grad school, right? And Joel is here. I think, Joel, that I think you were editor of Chicago Review when the interviews with both Patricia and Maureen were published, right? And so, with both working on Chicago Review and doing Projective Industries, there was a kind of, I wanted to get a kind of agency because grad school is a place that is where you often don't feel like you have a lot of agency, right? Or it's complicated.
Mm.
Um, and doing both of those projects together, working on Chicago Review and working on Projective Industries, they felt very different. And that really allowed me to think through questions of value, which I
Mm.
think you two have also talked about a lot in this hour in beautiful ways. And and really for myself too, like what registers of value, how we describe them, how they circulate, what they could mean in community formation, like how DIY energy fits into that, why we are skeptical of like certain kinds of DIY energy and value, right? Self-publishing versus some sort of other, more established publish. So I was really working through a lot of these issues in my own thinking, and I wanted to be really involved, and I wanted to challenge
Mm.
my own thinking about poetic value. I mean, I think it's a place where we lose a lot of audience because we make assumptions based on what readers want in specific circumstances.
Mm.
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 So we have about 10 more minutes, and I do want to make sure that we have time to take some questions. We're a small group, so if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question, feel free to, or if you'd like to put a question in the chat, that's also great. And I'll give people a minute or so, and if we don't have questions, I can always ask more.
I would love to ask a question.
You, you
Stephanie,
would.
Stephanie, you were just talking about graduate school, so it made me think about Patricia, something you said in the book of interviews edited by Rona and Yasmin. You say in that interview about the poetry project that one thing that was so unique about the project as a literary institution in the early 70s was that at that time period, there just weren't a lot of MFA programs in creative writing in the country.
Right.
And so, like, to be part of a community of people that were interested in um, small press publishing and poetry that like existed outside of the mainstream, it was just so rare. And so that was like one of the reasons why the project was so important at that particular moment. And I wonder, to go back to the very beginning of the conversation, something about like the connection between the workshop space and the publishing activity at the project and how those are really, really like bound up. I wondered if maybe both of you could talk about that a little bit more, like I guess even in like against this like
But
MFA
but you
project.
know what, Nick? I the project had all of that, but that wasn't just in New York. That was the people at Beyond Bureau had that. There were independent literary centers were everywhere across the country, and they were thriving. And then the NEA stopped funding independent literary centers. And a lot of people, a lot of places could not recoup that support. And so they didn't, continue. So, but because I remember when I went to San Francisco, and I'm telling you, there must have been 10 these people did. You talk about New York is about all about people like, hanging out together, kind of being inclusive and checking each other out. Not in San Francisco. These people over here did not talk to those people over there, and those people over there didn't talk to either of them. And it was, some people on this side of the bay, some people. It was insane. I said, "Who?" And the place was like this big. Like what the? And so I have come to appreciate the value of independent literary centers, and the rigor, which a lot of MFA programs presume they don't have in terms of the workshops. And so one of the things that I think for a while was a big sort of fight between the independents and the MFA people. And the MFA people won because there's just more of them and they have money, right? So, but I guess I would say, yeah, of course, if you were in workshops and you heard somebody's poem and you were publishing a magazine, of course you would try to publish that poem. That just makes sense. Proximity is kind of useful. But there were a little mag. I mean, I worked at CCLM for 2.5 years. There were a ton of literary magazines all over the country.
Yeah, true. Well, that was kind of the golden age too for uh, getting funding for little magazines because I was on the board of CCLM for a couple of
Mhm.
years.
Mhm.
You know, that was really great. That I know for me that made a big difference with telephone. I was able to get grants from the New York State Council and CCLM, and otherwise I would have never been able to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah, within that golden age went.
Well, politics, we're poets and poetry are the canaries in the coal mine. You know, we got hit first. We got
Yeah,
hit first.
that's true. The arts always gets hit first.
Yeah.
Yeah, the little percentage that we have.
Yeah, but it's interesting to think about the relationship between, sort of the early, more flush years of the NEA and how that has
Yeah,
slowly over the decades tapered down at the same time that there was, these the MFA. I mean, I went to the University of Alabama for the MFA where everyone was fully funded and it was in Tuscaloosa and my rent was $335 a month. And
mm,
that allowed me to
yeah,
writer, right? To
yeah,
prioritize my writing for the
yeah,
years that I was in this very cheap town, making a little bit of money, teaching a lot of freshman comp.
yeah,
But the university becomes a patronage structure, which is
yeah,
a lot less free flowing, maybe, than a community workshop can be, though not
yeah,
necessarily rigorous. I think you're absolutely right, Patricia, that there's a level of rigor. Still in, like workshops that I've taken at the Poetry Project in the last 10 years, there's still a really high level of professionalism and thought in those
Mhm.
spaces.
So, Nick, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I love that you started talking about the NEA right away. That's the perfect arc. Um, Stephanie, could I ask you, like, now that this book has been published, Women in Independent Publishing, like, what what is your like what has been your biggest takeaway as a scholar and as a thinker from having this book in the world finally? Because I know this was a long process for you, and it came out, I think, in such a perfect form.
What is my biggest takeaway? Oh gosh, I mean, like to trust your instincts, I guess. I don't, there were so many moments when I thought, oh well, if some of the interviews are published, it's okay if the book's not published, like trying to just keep going. Yeah, and MC, as you mentioned at the beginning, was like just vital in being like, no, it needs to be a book. But at various moments, I thought, does anyone really want to read about like the things that obsess me about these stories? I would reread all of the interviews and be like, how many times can I ask about collation? Like, really? Like, does anyone really want to read about the collating parties? And then it turns out people do. Um, and so that's been really, really wonderful to like hear that the interviews are as great as and captivating and compelling as I thought they were. And so that's my biggest takeaway, I think. Go ahead and ask the nitty-gritty production questions. People are interested. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also
Yeah.
so much to be said for getting to see them all in one place, right? I
Mhm.
think each of the interviews is really exciting on its own, but getting to have like, this kind of record feels
Yeah.
really special. I mean, obviously, I was biased because I from the beginning was like, I want this to be a book because I want to be able to put it on my shelf. So I'm very excited that I can now do that.
And I think that it shows like the complexity of how individuals and presses and projects develop. It was a hard book to order because,
Mhm.
does it go in chronological order by press or by person's involvement? I
Mm.
decided to do it by press because I wanted to indicate that there were times when a project and a person are very close together, as in Maureen's case, right? But there are times for instance, Patricia mentioned the Basement Workshop and Bridge Magazine and Renee Tehima where that was only a moment in the trajectory of that longer institution or project. So thinking about like how we interact with these kinds of things and how we just do it, right? And Patricia's interview is a great micro example of that because of the different types of projects addressed there. Mm. So thank you both. Is what I really mean to say,
Oh,
because
thank you for
both
doing
of
this.
you did very early interviews, So in a lot of ways,
I
I feel like
know.
a very different self talking to
We,
you
we,
now.
we, we were the whatever.
Well, there were times over the years where I wouldn't hear from you for months. And then suddenly I get an email and I think, she's still out there. She's still working on this. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say so I'm trying to catch up on stuff because I haven't read the whole thing, and I'm not gonna lie about that. But I just reading Susan Sherman's interview was really amazing
Mm.
because she also was a really good friend. She was not part of the poetry project at all, and totally leftist, totally feminine, lesbian feminist and stuff. But she also is just seems like the ultimate Lower East Side person,
Mm.
that everything, who literally goes out into the entire world and brings things back. And I have my copy of Art Against Apartheid, um, the icon issue, and I am so glad I have it. And I think that her and Hetty and Martha King, all of them, those women who are like 10, 15 years or more older than me, all just seemed so incredibly powerful because they had struggled so hard in
Yeah.
different kinds of ways, just to get what they wanted done. And they did it. They, Hetty, little tiny Hetty did it. Susan did it, and when you were talking about this, I thought women in independent, me, I had one little tiny Mimeo magazine and something else. And I'm like, but there are all these other people who've done extraordinary things, like Maureen and Susan Sherman. And, it was kind of great to see that. And then my favorite interview was Bernadette Mayer. Hi, Bernadette. I see you're here. Uh, because she just was like, I don't care. I'm goofy, but I get things done, you know? Uh,
I
and
loved how she kept talking about how much fun it was,
yeah,
because it is fun.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like we had parties, people showed
Yeah.
up, you
Oh,
know?
yeah.
You could ask people for artwork, then they get mad at you if you turn it back and it smelled. That's another story. And you could, it was, what is that great Roland Barthes, the pleasures of the text, you know.
Mhm.
It's the pleasures of I think all of us are talking about the pleasures of the literary community or
Mhm.
communities, because there's so many of them. And some of them are involved in putting together, you know, magazines and books uh, that other people hopefully will read and enjoy or be pissed off about. We don't know which, maybe both. Um, and there's there's so little we don't. One of the things that's great about being a creative person is that it is delightful. That there
Mhm.
is a sense of pleasure, of generosity. There is that pizza and that wine. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So
you know,
true.
and if you're a poor person and you don't have no money and you know that somebody's going to have a collating party, you show up because
That's
there's
right.
that pizza and that wine.
Fine. Yes, so true. Very helpful.
I feel like maybe ending with pizza and wine is like an ideal spot for this.
Oh yeah, I wish we were all there and we could
I
have
know.
some.
Thank you all so much for this. I think Nick said that this is going to be online like tomorrow. So,
Great.
you can re-experience it whenever your heart desires.
Right.
And tell other people they missed a great conversation and they should
Yes, it was
check
very
it out.
fun.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Thank you all so much. Thank you, audience members. Thank you, Stephanie, for making this incredible object appear in the world. Thank you, Nick, for the invitation, and Rosa. And thank you, Patricia and Maureen, so much for spending this time with us.
Oh,
We should
thanks for
all
the
hold it up.
book.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, here
It's
we
a
go.
great book.
Wait, we gotta take a screenshot. Wait, did I get it? I'm really, there we go. All right, I took a picture of us.
All right.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you,
Thank
Yes.
Stephanie.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Yeah.
MC. Thank you, Nick. And
Mhm.
thank you, Maureen.
Thank you, Patricia.
Great. Awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you
this
all
was
so
terrific.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have a great night/day, depending on what continent.
Where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Good night.
Okay, so